Okay, thank you. And actually, among my titles, and it's my favorite over my last many decades of working, is Chief of What's Next. It's a self-designated title after having been an attorney and a commissioner and a whole bunch of other things. But I appreciate it the most because what I'll talk to you about today is a little bit about who we are, what we do, why we do it, but then focus on what's cooking, what's next. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll talk about the Center for Good Food Purchasing. We're grateful that Monty Roulier I was the founding chair and Monty has succeeded me as chair of the board. So we're really happy to have him as part of it. He's brought a lot to that work. So our work is in the food system. And part of the vital conditions designate basic needs around food. Our thinking goes beyond the purchase to plate, the short line of purchase to plate, goes beyond the longer line of farm to fork, and looks at the system in a multidimensional way, because it is that. It's an interdependent system. And we also take in the dimension of time and history, because a lot of what our food system is today is a colonized system. It's industrialized and colonized. I am part Hawaiian. I'm from Hawaii. And Hawaii has that example of its government being overthrown, the whole country of Hawaii being overthrown for the sake of growing sugar. And look at where that's taken us as a country, particularly if you look at the health impacts, not only the land use impacts that Hawaii is an example about and sovereignty impacts. But so it's a system. And it creates problems. So we work on the whole system and we create a demand signal using the power of procurement. In other words, the purchasing power of large institutions to be models and to create a demand side signal and a pull signal to make economic and market shifts in the system along the areas of our 5 value categories, which support local economies, environmental sustainability, animal welfare, fair labor, and nutritional health. Next slide, please. So this is where we are. Our reach is across the country. And the reason we have 2 different colors there. So we started in Los Angeles. I was a senior advisor on food policy to Mayor Villaraigosa of Los Angeles and developed the food policy framework for the city of LA, out of which this came. We've spread across the country since then, obviously in many institutions in California. Where we have orange flags is where, in addition to a number of institutions in that region being enrolled in our program, there's also been an adoption by some official act of a government entity like a mayor, city council, county board of supervisors, school board, where they've adopted it by motion or executive order as well, including New York and Chicago, obviously Los Angeles and these other places, and my home state of Hawaii. So I'm happy to see that with the Oahu Good Food Purchasing Program there. So we have over 66 large-scale institutions, 28 of which are school districts enrolled in the program. And we are evaluating their purchasing and helping them make market shifts. And we are looking at about over $1 billion worth of food purchasing now. Next slide, please. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm talking fast, so I hope that's not too fast. We were really pleased to be able to have a mention in the Equitable Long-Term Recovery and Resilience Plan. Thank you for that. We are mentioned as a game-changing innovation. I will mention also that we've got an award from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization as an innovative policy scaling up agroecology, and we appreciate that recognition. Next slide. A little bit about why, which I was asked to elaborate on somewhat. I think many of us know about this, but the industrialization of the system, the consolidation into a few corporate controlled systems. And this is not to say anything against corporation. It's that there's consolidation has created scale, efficiencies, economies of scale that lead to industrialization that sort of look at a singular drive toward efficiency and profit that don't necessarily take in the dimensional aspects of what the food system is. So it's had those consequences in a number of ways, including the drive toward cheap labor. So a lot of labor in our food system is exploited. I mean, there's a history of that would take a whole other hour to discuss. So I won't go into it, just know that there is, including the extraction of natural resources for the system. And there is a better way. There's a regenerative, holistic way. That's what we drive towards. So next slide, please. Want to just call out some statistics. The lowest paying jobs in the US are in the food system. This is why we work to make changes. There's the health impacts of the food system tend to impact people of color. So African Americans are more likely to have diabetes. This is equally true of Native Hawaiians. I'm a Native Hawaiian, as I mentioned, and Native Americans and others. And most of the animal products in the country come from concentrated animal feeding operations, which have a lot of negative consequences. Next slide, please. This was categorized and quantified in a report that I recommend to you by the Rockefeller Foundation. It's available on the Community Commons website. I think it's available on some of the other websites. So you can look at the report yourself as well as its methodology. The bottom line is the costs, if you were just to look at costs of the US food system, is 1.1 trillion. The externalized costs, in other words, those impacts that I just described to you that aren't part of the transactional cost of the food, are twice as much. So the total impact of the food system is bigger. From a negative standpoint, we're paying more because of these externalized costs from a public standpoint than the actual cost of the dollar. Quick example, like if you were to buy an organic apple from a local farmer, maybe it's $1, but you don't have any externalized costs. If you were to buy a cheaper apple that was industrially produced, apples are not the best example, but there's externalized costs, right, of picking it up. So you're actually paying more than the cost of the apple, and it's probably more than the organic apple. Next slide, please. Just really quickly to show you this waterfall on what the Rockefeller Foundation was able to quantify in terms of these negative impacts. The biggest negative impacts, no surprise, are in the health system. So the human health negative impacts, this is on the left side of this screen where you see human health, are as much as whatever the cost of that product is. You're paying it out in federal money and other public dollars to take care of those human health impacts. But this is true also across all these other characteristics of the environment, including biodiversity and suppressed wages and working conditions and those impacts. So we got to make these changes, right? So next slide, what are we doing about it? There is a huge opportunity. We're doing our work, which I already told you about. But what's next part, the what's cooking part, like right now part, is the federal opportunity. There's lots of money being spent by the federal government, tens of billions of dollars a year in a number of different programs, including the school food program, the Veterans Administration, military service, et cetera. And yet the current spending, because it's kind of automatic, and in that automatic 20th century system, it runs counter. It's reinforcing the old paradigm. It's not moving in a new direction. So next slide. Here's what we're working on right now with the federal collaboration. This is the last slide. So we're working on these opportunities. They're key opportunities that are building blocks that will help establish a government-wide framework for a values-aligned program. In other words, can't our food purchasing at the federal level reflect our values instead of just blindly reinforcing the ones that were set into motion a long time ago? So we're working on updating the federal food service guidelines. A press release just went out today from one of our partners in this federal Good Food Purchasing Coalition, the Center for Science in the Public Interest. So look for that. Maybe it's in your inbox. And so I'll let you find out more about it from that. And then we hope to create a pilot project for an incentive fund for schools to be able to improve their purchasing, to buy more, to support local economies, small and BIPOC producers, as well as support the environment and better wages. So to give them an extra amount of funding for that, and then to expand values-aligned food products and other federal purchasing like the U.S. state food programs. And the other thing that's really important, it goes along with democracy and accountable government, is to create transparency, public reporting, and accountability. So how's this money being spent? Can we ask, say, the Department of Defense to let us know how are you spending your dollars on food purchasing? And then we can, work with them on, I'm sure they'd be interested in making these changes. So overall, this is about walking the walk, walking the talk by the federal government, but then also creating these conditions so that the state and local governments can follow, creating opportunities for the funding flows to activate state and local governments to do the same. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak.